Hello and welcome to Ambience, a series of conversations with the personalities behind the Sushitech label. My name is Ben Start. I'm the Sushitech events manager and author of the Restart blog. To kick off the series, we called up Kerry, the Sushitech design mastermind and head designer at the Saatchi and Saatchi creative agency. In the conversation that follows, we dive into how he finds order in chaos in his work, the freedom of working with a boutique label, and seeing his work popping up in public. This can be from as far and wide as the Tube in London to Times Square in New York. There's so much to be inspired by in Kerry's work. And in the conversation, he doesn't hold back in taking us inside his extremely lively mind. So, without further ado, let's head over to this chat recorded late in 2020. So, Kerry, with this being such an exceptional year, can you tell us a little bit about your year that was 2020?
Where do I start? So I found it quite exciting at first and a bit different, that kind of, that remote working or finding new ways of working. But I soon realised that I'm quite a sociable person, so being isolated has not been particularly good. And especially as, obviously I head up design at an ad agency, so collaboration is key, probably the same in the music industry. You sort of bounce, you sort of bounce off each other, you see what people are up to, you all collaborate. So that's been a real shitter for me, basically. And again, looking after what, a fairly big design team, probably about 15 people. There's no way of nurturing and teaching in the ways that I'd like to. I personally like to lead by example, so I will get stuck in and do the work and help teach people in those ways. And then, I think the boredom of lockdown, the frustration, and then there was that glimmer of hope, I suppose, towards the end of the summer. But then, of course, a few weeks of a bit more relaxed vibes, and I sort of popped into the office a few times. But then, straight back into lockdown again. Part of me just wants to start, 2021, fresh start, everything as it was. But again, that's looking highly unlikely, eh?
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about the creative process. I mean, that's kind of why we're working on this Ambience Elements series, is to connect with people and sort of try and inspire people, and really sort of like share some kind of secrets almost, and like build our community, because obviously we can't connect with them as we normally would with clubs. And it sounds like from what you were describing that there's sort of something missing from the creative process that you can't have from not being around other people.
No, 100%, yeah. I think that collaboration is so important. And it's one of those magical ingredients. Stuff just happens. When you have people like-minded people in a room, and ideas come from many places. But it's tricky, should I say. And again, you don't get that over Zoom. You don't get that interaction, that body language, or sort of happy accidents, or it just seems like a lot of the magic is gone for me for this year. And but again, that's mainly on. I got to say though, that's mainly on the commercial side of stuff. When I'm designing sleeves for Sushitech, that's a different matter, because I like being in my own space. Then it's more of an art-based way of thinking, so I can kind of get in the zone and sort of just come up with some lovely visuals. So it's two sides. So I think is that kind of big commercial stuff which needs that lovely collaboration and sparks, and then we've got the lovely, more arty sort of isolation style work, which is why I kind of enjoy doing both, actually, because you get both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How
Yeah.
The Sushitech work is almost sounds like a bit of an escape for you.
Oh, massive, yeah. And I've always been into art and experimenting, and I think what the Sushitech work has allowed me to do is bring those experiments into a more commercial realm, as opposed to fine art. Because as you're probably aware, there's lots of textural experimentation, painting, and
Absolutely.
typography.
Yeah.
Which I couldn't use in my day to day. But saying that, there's some of my experimental work does end up in my commercial work, and then being so commercially aware when I'm in the advertising world, it helps me think of ideas or stronger ideas for the Sushitech visual world. So they both complement one another. So that's really enjoyable, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I find the Sushitech, there's a common thread of order, but there's, like sometimes I look at it and it's like, oh my God, that's so hectic. And then there's so many little subtleties in there that kind of impose a bit of order on the work.
And that's a bit like me, I think, the way I am. And I think what I love is having all the chaos, but then complementing or contrasting it with structure. So, I might put really loose paint marks, but then there might be a really graphic element that's really straight and crisp, or the typography might be set in such a way that everything just complements one another. And again, I thoroughly enjoy the Sushitech world, and it's a case of just, again, trying to make or get ideas in there somehow. And I never listen to the music as such, but Yossi will always give me the track titles or the album title, and I'll try and come up with a concept that feels right for that, which again is great. So I do so many experiments. It's a matter of putting this sort of jigsaw puzzle together, and it's kind of organized chaos, I suppose.
Yeah.
And again, it's for me to reflect the music in many respects, or the musical world, which is quite expressive and very powerful. And it's very hard to capture that in static. And I think it's the same for the advertising world, by the way, where you can have 30-second commercials, but the most difficult thing to always nail is the static poster, where you have no sound, you have no animation or motion or film. So that, I thoroughly enjoy trying to capture the essence of the brief in a static way.
Yeah, some of your static work, the what I found particularly striking was the obesity campaign and the smoking campaigns, and like they're both like highly politicized, and like money from tobacco funds the NHS and and it's very, very complicated. But so how do you kind of detach yourself and focus on what you're doing in those kind of situations?
I think constantly being curious about things, whether that's graphically or music or art or film. So constantly being a sort of little sponge. And what happens is when you get these briefs, because you're constantly sponging up stuff, I think it helps form an idea. And that obesity work, that I came up with that. It took me, I think it was about 3 or 4 minutes. I was given the brief, and they said that obesity was the second biggest cause of preventable cancer. So what could we do? And then it came to me sort of straight away, and I actually did it on the computer within 10 minutes, and then hid it from the creative director for 3 days, because I didn't want to think that it was kind of a rush thought.
Gotta keep that mystique going.
Yeah, and so a lot of the time people dismiss first thoughts. But again, the department had been struggling cracking the idea. But when I come to it fresh, my thought seemed right, and it happened. It did take 3 years for it to come out into the world, because there was a lot of politics involved, and again, you've got to be very careful when you're tackling big corporations or brands. But no, yeah, and again, it's the same with a lot of stuff. Even with the Sushitech work, I think Mono-Aware is one of them, where I was down in Brighton for a bit of a break, a day out, and I just saw a woman floating on the water, and I knew, and I captured it on my phone, and I knew that Yossi would come to me at some point with a album title which would be relevant, and it just seemed to fit. So I do a lot of stuff proactively, which then fits future projects and such.
So would you say you're more there's somewhere on the scale of looking for inspiration and inspiration finding you, or do you think you're just always on the lookout? You're in that habit of just looking for inspiration in everything you see?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I don't actively look for inspiration as such. I know a lot of people will troll the internet and look for inspiration, but I just think getting out and about and just absorbing stuff, it all feeds to that bank of knowledge, which then can be applied to commercial work or artwork or concepts. So constantly, and again, I see textures on, tree bark or broken concrete. I'll photograph that, and constantly looking for bits and typography inspiration, and but not crazily. Just I suppose I've done it for so long, it just becomes habitual. Truthfully,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and even I love infographics, and sometimes you get some lovely functional typography on box packaging or anything. And I think one of the inspirations for, I think it was Steve O'Sullivan's Mosaic series, was kind of a textile pattern that I saw on the tube seats.
That's amazing.
And it wasn't the full pattern, but there was an element within the pattern, and I thought that looks super striking. And then I did a simpler version of it, and then we ended up using it on one of the sleeves. And again, that's a good example of strong, flat graphic against sort of textural and chaotic backgrounds and whatnot.
I've got this great image of you sat on the tube there with kind of living in a sort of like Disney world with just characters jumping out of everywhere and inspiring you, and that kind of vibe. So,
no, totally. And it's like I said, it comes from anywhere. This kind of the inspiration. Like I said, it could be a texture or a pattern on a tube seat to cracked concrete to sort of I don't know, everywhere.
I think that'll be really inspiring for people in any creative walk of life, because I think people feel a lot of pressure to sit down and research, and sometimes you can't force those kind of things.
I was going to say, if you feel it's very, I don't know, it's, when you force stuff, it seems to not be as productive, truthfully. And I think that's why they say people have some of their best ideas when they're under a shower or a bath.
Always the shower.
Yeah, and I think it's where, and I don't know if it's scientific proof, but where you're a bit more relaxed, and then your brain subconsciously will put the pieces of the puzzle together, and then you get this bit of inspiration, spark. Yeah, and that happens quite a lot, actually. And again, it's this similar thing to the T-shirt that they sell in the Science Museum. I had that concept 20 years ago, and then eventually got it made up, and that's the one where it's the human ingredients on the T-shirt, the atomic mass of the human body. And again, I think that was one of those thoughts that just popped in my head, and I had to get it made, and I did. Yeah.
Nice. So if people are looking to kind of beef up their own creative project and maybe like hack into their own creativity? Is there sort of any patterns or particular space that you'd recommend that you like most feel inspired by it?
Nothing in particular. I think maybe I've just mastered the art of that kind of not trying to think too hard about something, because I know it will come. And again, when Yossi gives me the sort of album titles, I can picture almost straight away what it should look and feel like in my head. And again, because I've got so much experience in making, I can act on that pretty quickly. But again, also equally with the Sushitech stuff, I do so many experiments, and then it's just trying to mix. It's like a mix of these experiments bolt together to create the final piece. I think Tessera 2 is a good example of just something that again felt right, and my wife went a bit crazy because I made a lot of mess painting those, sort of experimenting with shapes and getting the flow of music, trying to represent that. And I think, yeah, that was a great project in the end.
That's kind of an epic, right? I mean, it from cover to cover, and each individual artwork just is so succinct and just tells the story of, that holds the whole release together in my mind.
Yeah. And again, it was that lovely clash or contrast of the beautiful paint flows, and then with the really graphic marks at times to sort of just juxtaposition against the free-flowing nature, which was really nice.
So how do those works come about? You start literally with a brush and a canvas in front of you?
Yeah, usually it's sort of a sketch pad, actually, a sort of A3, quite a thick sketch pad, which then I'll use acrylic paint and different objects to try and make different marks, and again, just purely experimenting, which is great fun.
Is there a particular record cover that you sort of feel that you've kind of got close to like the full expression of your art in that sense?
I think they're all very. I think they're all very different, and I love each one in its own way. I think the Blue Train one particularly was super striking, but again, that was very photographic based,
very emotional piece.
Yeah, and Tessera is very different, mono aware. There's Thor's Consequences. That was another lovely sort of contrast of free flow with a graphic square. So no, I think they're all unique, and I don't get any one of them is my favourite as such.
Yeah.
Again, but what I love about that world is, even though it's obviously very monotone and black and white, they still have their own distinct look and feels, which I love. They still feel part of the set, but they all stand out in their own kind of way, which is amazing considering the limitation of black and white.
Yeah, and like a 12-inch square.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, especially say take the artwork for the latest Fluera compilation.
Yeah.
What you've done with the text itself is just so subtle. It's like, I don't know, it's kind of 3 or 4 levels deep of Inception, the way you've just hinted to the title in the work. I just love it, it just draws you in to the piece.
Yes, that's a lovely, another quite an unusual one for us to do, in the sense that using creatures and stuff, but again still trying to retain that kind of expressive nature. And again with the typography, I'm not a greatest fan of, what's the word, just sort of typing it out and printing it out. I'd like to experiment with the type and make it feel organic. And make it feel part of the artwork itself, or part of the image itself. And I always do that because it's something quite cold about, I think, technology, in the sense that if I was to just typeset it on the computer and just send that to print, it just lacks a bit of that organic nature, I think. So I like to just adjust that and experiment. Yeah, and equally, I put as much love into the back of the sleeves as I do as the front, and it's just, and again, that lovely gridded typography, but again, being fairly loose, but structured with it, and a combination of texture and mark making just sort of helps free it up a bit, which is nice.
Yeah, there's two sort of strands that we're touching on here, like the concepts and that sort of natural forms versus like kind of industrial forms almost. Is that almost like a conflict?
I wouldn't say it's a conflict as such. I just love that kind of the feel of nature and sort of organic and natural, and the unexpected ways that stuff can happen, again with paint and textures. So I suppose painting in itself, with many artists, they're quite I think I prefer the more expressive kind of people as to the more realistic sort of side of art. But I don't know, I just think it's capturing, again, because a lot of this stuff is static, it's trying to capture an emotion or convey an emotion to the viewer as such. So
are there certain visual artists that inspire you?
I suppose people, you think of people like Picasso and all that lot, and Jackson Pollock, and just being very, very expressive. So in that sense, not saying I'm a Picasso or Pollock, but but I just love that free flowing nature and kind of experimentation with mark making and paint, and
just kind of a lack of limitation almost.
I suppose that comes down to technology, because I studied graphic design in the 90s, and it was quite an exciting time because computers had only just come in as such, and people were still, including myself, experimenting with photocopiers and printmaking and mark making and all that. And I think that seemed to slip the way the more technology embedded itself in the design world. That kind of slipped away. So I think for many of the early 2000s or noughties, whatever they call them, there was quite a technology feel to a lot of work.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Very, overly photoshopped and layered, but very cold. It's very, that's my personal opinion. Whereas the 90s for me was so exciting. And, I've done it for 30 years now almost. Just sort of experimenting and all that. And so I scan and stuff at super high res. I incorporate that into my work. So I think I just love that kind of mixture of organic with, and again, it's all constructed on the computer, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have that clinical cold feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's kind of like the kind of old school Star Wars compared to the kind of Phantom Menace kind of. It's just too clean, too crisp.
Yeah, and it for me, that stuff, that kind of world feels quite cold, and I don't know, it's got no soul to it. And I think, again, if you're trying to represent music and other sort of, I say not commercial projects, but expressive projects, then I think it needs to have a bit of life to it as opposed to a coldness. And again, you look back at the old, is it V23, the Pixies album covers? They're beautiful, and again, there's textures and
the
layering.
The Doolittle covers very deep, isn't it? Very textured, because it's like it's almost like an oil painting of a monkey. Is that right? With the frame.
I think it's a photo of a monkey, but again, very layered, and that was quite early on in the 90s, so that would have been touched by technology and whatnot a tad, but again, like I said, 10 years later, everything felt so graphic, lines everywhere, and just layers, and I don't know, it just felt very cold. But I'm seeing a big resurgence in, again, the more organic stuff now, which is nice.
Yeah, I think with all art, it always swings like a pendulum, doesn't it? Like there's always a reaction and then a kind of counter reaction.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and I know a lot of the youngsters that I sort of work with are trying out and experimenting with textural based stuff, and it's quite interesting. That kind of, it's almost a bit of a backlash against technology in a way, but again, like you said, it kind of comes in cycles and waves. But
I wanted to ask you about how you put your team together. Hopefully we'll come on to that in a bit, but that just what you said about the younger people on your team, do you feel that they're kind of deliberately reacting against this really clean, polished art?
I think they just seem to do it naturally, but I don't know the full reasons behind it, because again, a lot of them may have not touched kind of old printing techniques or old sort of design making techniques, but it just seems to be the thing at the moment. And it also, I think the thing at the moment is, or for the last couple of years, is bad typography, like really awful typesetting or stretching type. And then, but again, it can work. I was always taught never ever stretch a font ever. but sometimes I do experiment with stuff. I do manipulate stuff, not to the extent of stretching it crazily or anything. But
I saw your Instagram. You've done something with Zara, with a Zara typeface.
Oh no, that was me mocking Zara because they
I see.
because they kind of clashed all the letters together, and it just doesn't feel quite. It's kind of an in design joke.
Needs some space.
Needs some space.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you grew up in Wales, is that right?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
Yes. South Wales, so Aberdeen, which is about 20 miles away from Cardiff, in the valleys, which is great. But I was always into art, so this was a very little opportunity there. It's quite an old mining town, but again, a great place to grow up. Brilliant people, friendly, and I just needed to pursue a career in art, basically. And I suppose trying to do that, for me, to make money, I think graphic design is obviously quite a big, broad area which can utilise art skills and an art-based nature. So yeah, and I did work in Cardiff for 1 year, but what I struggled with, I sort of did London for a bit, and then I ended up going back to Wales. My dad had been quite ill, so I sort of moved back to Wales, worked for a little design company in Cardiff. And that was, again, it was a brilliant laugh. And I'd finish work at 5:30. I'd be home by 5:32, I think. So I lived opposite work, and then I'd just go out and have fun. But what I missed about London was, again, that inspiration. Cardiff's a lovely city, but it's very small. And I think what's exciting about London is, you get on the tube and you be inspired by posters, or you go out to a club and you just, there's something different every day and everywhere in London. So eventually, I moved back because I kind of lost inspiration in living in Cardiff.
How long have you been in London now?
That'd be 20 years now.
Yeah, I think like we sort of come from, I mean, this is something that Yossi and I talk about a lot, is we kind of come from this generation that's been inspired by a lot of London's nightlife. Can you tell me a bit about like the inspirations that you took from that kind of, it was a really unique kind of party scene, I guess, in the sort of early 2000s, late 2000s fabric.
I think there's always been, a quite interesting design world around music for God, as long as music's been around, probably.
Of course, yeah.
But I think obviously the club flyers of the 80s, 90s, they were quite interesting, and then they said Fabric took it to another place when they started releasing stuff and definitely for me, changed the opinion of what a club should behave as a brand, as a visual brand. And I suppose you had a renaissance in the 90s, but again, that was fine. But I think, Fabric for me as a designer was amazing. You know, their identity, the way they packaged up and designed their music. And again, I've always done lots for music, actually. I suppose flyers for, you know, the friends that were running the house train thing. And a guy called Phil Lorraine, and actually he still does house train stuff. Lovely guy. I think he's moved to Ibiza now, I think. But yeah, super lovely guy. And then what else did I do? I did some like indie rock stuff for a band called Moth in the States. And then I ended up doing some bits for late night alumni, who Cascade is part of. Cascade. I did a few little bits for Cascade. I was done bits and pieces, and then a few years later, Yossi and I got in touch, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, Yossi sees it as a collaboration, really. So since sort of 2008, you've been guiding the artwork direction, or like almost had complete control of it.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and you know, it's wonderful stuff to do. And again, you can't beat that sort of 12-inch format, in the sense that it's a piece of art in its own right. But the Sushitech's the biggest, longest, and probably the most enjoyable collaboration. Yeah, super proud of it, and what I love, you know, because you guys probably know I'm more of an indie kid. You know, I grew up in the Stone Roses, Charlatans, Pixies, and funny enough, I'm doing some work for Saul Davis from James at the minute, which is
James.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard a really, really good interview with him, a podcast, taking it off subject, but it's amazing. You should check it. Really interesting.
Yeah, but he's always brilliant. It's funny, but it's an anti-hate initiative. So to try and fight. Initially, it started off trying to fight racism in football and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting project, and Saatchi's given their backing and support, which is good. So hopefully something will happen with that next year, because again, this year's kind of written everything off in many respects. So I've always been sort of from that indie background, and working with Saul has been great to meet him. I think I remember dancing to his music when I was a teenager in a youth club. So it's quite funny to actually be working with him now. Well, that's why I love doing the Sushitech stuff, because I'm also a big fan of the mindset that if for instance I was super into techno music or Detroit music and all that stuff, I might get a bit bamboozled, because a number of times I've been working on stuff in the office and people have been like, oh my god, I remember somebody saying, you do something for Delano Smith? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh my god, he's massive. And I was like, I didn't know, I didn't know disrespect to Delano. So I don't get starstruck or feel threatened about what I'm going to deliver, if that makes sense, or intimidated by what I'm going to deliver, because I just do it. And it's the same with, I remember doing the sit sleeves, and again, I was at a different agency at the time, and one of the guys was like, oh my god, sit are huge. And I was like, oh really? So it's quite nice that I'm kind of oblivious to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, for me, working in music, one of the joys is you can interact with Delano Smith, he's kind of one of the first generations of an art form. I mean, it's an art form that is, less than 50 years old, and he's like one of the very, very first who picked up that ball and started running with it, Yeah,
he played literally a 10-minute walk from where I live now in he played a set at Crystal Palace, and so I went down to meet him, and super, super nice guy.
So just kind of going back to like sort of holding the record itself, and can you tell us a little bit about the sort of difference between holding a record, a 12-inch, and then seeing your work on the tube? Because I mean, it seems like two totally different worlds.
It is, and again, I think I get satisfaction out of both in many respects, and especially that obesity campaign last year. I'd had a bit of a shitty period, like really bad depression, and then all the usual artistic torture of self-doubt and all that kind of shit. And then part of what made my recovery better was sort of going out on the street and seeing these cigarette packets everywhere, or the posters, the obesity cigarette posters. And it part of me was like, well, I did that, I conceived that, I designed it, I made it. So that, it's great seeing the work out there in the real world. And I think it goes back to that thing about me liking stuff organic. When you see something printed, it becomes real. I think the problem I have a lot with the digital space is it's kind of there, but then when it's gone, if that makes sense. I think when you see physically printed matter, it's just, and the texture, and and Yossi has a great choice on the reverse board and all that kind of stuff. One thing I hate is shiny record sleeves. I was going to say.
Yeah. Nah, don't like it. Yeah.
No.
Give me Matt any day.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just the tactile nature of it, and seeing the print, and I don't know, just being able to hold it. And for a long time, the CDs are rubbish, but I'd always buy my CD off Amazon, and then I'd get the digital download, and you get the physical release as well. I don't do it anymore, because again, I find that digital space, it's got its advantages for sure, but it's not permanent enough for me. A number of times I've got on the tube, and then there's a big 48 sheet with my work on, and that's so rewarding. I've been at Saatchi's just over a year. It's been really tricky because like I said, I like to teach by, leading by example and mucking in and sharing my knowledge, and I've just not been able to do that remotely. So hopefully things will get better next year. And in particular, I did a campaign at the beginning of the year, which I'm really pleased about, but COVID kind of put it on hold, and that was for Expedia, and I created, I think it's 95 different posters in 5 days, which is quite insane.
That's a huge undertaking by the sounds of it.
Yeah. But they're wonderful. It's probably the best advertising design and art direction I've ever done. So fingers crossed that will happen next year. Mm-hmm. It's all ready to go. Just we need people to get back on flights and book holidays. But and again, I think once everything aligns, I can just, again, I suppose I've done it for so long, I can just go for it, and I know what feels right, so I can, my instincts sort of take me in the right direction. And it'd be good to help nurture my team that way. But again, unfortunately, I've just not been able to do that because of the nature of this year.
And ending on a positive note, you've obviously got a very privileged position. You can actually build a team that can communicate these ideas and communicate them well. What would you be looking for in a team member when you can sort of get everyone back in the office?
I think again that sort of natural curiosity and that kind of hunger to make things different. And again, that's both on a work level, design level, plus conceptual level. And Saatchi's have been particularly good in the sense of, we're massively into diversity and we want to push stuff. So I think if the right idea gets presented, yes, we can make that happen, which would be great. So there's been a massive shift this year, I think. But again, I have very little patience, and I just want stuff to happen quick. But so team-wise, we're all aligned. Everyone wants to do great work. And again, that constant hunger and curiosity and passion, I suppose,
Yeah, I like that. I really, really like that. That in this sort of like world when we are surrounded by machines buzzing away, we do all our work on computers. That
Yeah.
I mean, you've achieved so much. I mean, your Instagram just says it all really. And you say that the key ingredients are curiosity and hunger.
Yes, for me, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our listeners to take anything away, then that's got to be it. And also a little hint of like being in a room with other people and throwing ideas around, bouncing ideas, and getting like the acid test straight away.
No, totally. You know, and it's wonderful. It's you know, it's nothing more rewarding. It's a great, you know, a room full of great minds and bouncing with each other, and everyone's hungry, everyone's curious. You get some wonderful places. Yeah, super good. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't need to be in Saatchi and Saatchi. It can be in any office, in any place, I guess, when they're inspired.
Yeah, it could be anywhere, and I think that's the way. I think change only happens by, you know, great collaboration. Truthfully, and especially when we're talking about, again, the diversity issue and climate issues and all that kind of stuff. The only way that's going to change is going to be a massive collaborative effort.
Yeah, we're turning the corner, I feel.
Yeah, and I get, and hopefully next year, you know, this virus can be under control, and there'll be a lot of people sort of appreciating, you know, other people and life in general, and, you know, celebrating.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're doing this, to sort of help decode a lot of these messages, and hopefully, you know, just those little words like curiosity and hunger. I think that's something that everyone can relate to. So I'd quite like to leave it there and let you get on, if that's all right with you.
That's all right. Thank you, Ben. And yeah, good speaking to you.
So huge thanks there to Kerry for that conversation. There's so much packed in there for everyone doing something creative to discover. Those themes of collaborating, curiosity, and sponging up ideas are really fundamental. We hope that you find Kerry's story as inspiring as we did. So, from Wood White Studios, until next time, goodbye.